Tina, come home. There's nobody mad at you. My arms are open. The pets are missing you.
Hi, sweet ones. This is Grandma Kitty. Tonight I want to tell you a story about a man who fooled everyone for more than 6.5 years. He carried himself as a picture of sorrow. He was the grieving husband, the man with a trembling voice on the news, the one whose tears seemed to come right on cue. He begged into the cameras, pleading, "Please, just come home." And the people believed him. The reporters offered their comfort. The neighbors lifted their prayers. He had convinced the world that he was broken, desperate, and lost without her. But with every step he took inside that house, the truth followed him. His wife was never missing. She was there the whole time, hidden just below him. And every desperate word he spoke to bring her back was spoken while he stood over her grave. Tina Satchwell was 45 years old when she vanished in March of the year 2017. She was born as Tina Dingan on the 30th of November, 1972, in Fermoy, a town in County Cork, Ireland. Tina was a small woman, only 5 feet and 4 inches tall, with shoulder-length blonde hair and striking blue eyes that made her stand out in any room. She had a Tweety bird tattoo on her chest and a belly button piercing, little details her family and friends would never forget. People who knew her best always described her as bright, bubbly, and beautiful. Someone with a warmth that made people feel welcome. But Tina's early life was not as simple as her smile made it seem. She had been raised by her grandmother, Florence Dingan, and for much of her childhood, she believed Florence was her mother. She only learned the truth much later when she was old enough to be confirmed in the Catholic Church and went looking for her birth certificate. That was when she discovered that her biological mother was actually Mary Collins, the woman she had grown up thinking was her sister. The truth broke her heart, but even so, Tina stayed deeply devoted to the grandmother who had loved and raised her. Fashion was at the center of Tina's life. Friends often said she had an expensive eye when it came to clothes and jewelry. Upstairs in her home, she kept racks filled with hundreds of outfits, some never even worn, with the tags still hanging. She would buy pieces, wear them a few times, and then resell them at car boot sales across County Cork. For Tina, it was never only about the clothes. Those sales were social gatherings, a chance to talk, laugh, and share stories with a regular circle of vendors and customers who looked forward to seeing her. She always dressed with care, often matching her outfits to those of her beloved Chihuahua Ruby. Her pets were more than companions. They were her family. Tina had Ruby and Heidi, 2 tiny dogs who never left her side, and a parrot named Valentine. To her, they were the children she never had. Those who had known her since she was young remembered that animals were always drawn to her. Cats and dogs followed her through the streets of Fermoy when she was little, as if they knew she belonged to them. Her love for animals never faded. Tina was also a woman who loved the water. She was a strong swimmer and happiest at the beach. That love of the sea drew her to Yeovil, a coastal town she and her husband Richard moved to in May of 2016. She loved the coastal beauty, the sound of waves, and the peace she found by the shore. Her friends and family often spoke about the 2 sides of Tina's personality. On the outside, she was bubbly and social, but in truth, she was shy and private, keeping much of herself guarded. Her doctor, who had cared for her for nearly 20 years, described her as always friendly, open, and a wonderful communicator. She had enjoyed good health her whole life. She had no illness, no condition that would shorten her years, no history of mental struggles, and no psychiatric record. Yet there was one heartbreak that weighed heavily on her. In the year 2012, her brother Tom died by suicide. The loss cut her deeply, and her grief was hard to bear. 2 years later, In the year 2014, she bought Ruby, her little chihuahua, as a way to cope with the sadness and give her life some light again. Ruby became her constant companion, a source of comfort in her darkest days. Tina first met Richard Satchwell on the 3rd of March, 1989, in Colville, near Leicester in England. At that time, Tina was just 17 years old, and Richard was 22. From the very first moment he saw her, Richard told his brother that this was the woman he would one day marry. He even called her his trophy wife, someone he felt was out of his league. Their connection was immediate, and they began dating quickly. Only a few months later, in October of that same year, Richard proposed to Tina at Mount Pleasant, looking out over Yeovil Bay. 2 years later, on Tina's 20th birthday, which was the 30th of November, 1991, they were married in Oldham, England. But this union came at a heavy cost. Richard's family strongly disapproved because they were openly anti-Irish. They gave him a cruel choice. He must pick between his family and Tina. Richard chose Tina, cutting himself off from his mother and never speaking to her again. None of his family came to the wedding. On the surface, that sacrifice might appear romantic, but in truth, it was the very first sign of the isolation that would come to define Tina's marriage. Richard, who worked as a lorry driver in Leicester, seemed completely consumed by Tina. He said often that he worshipped her, that he was besotted, and that he saw her as physically perfect, his beautiful Irish rose. He even knew the smallest details about her, such as her exact measurements and her clothing sizes. Richard claimed that every single evening, 7 nights a week, he would run a hot bath for her, fill it with bubbles, towel her dry afterward, rub baby oil into her skin, and then pedicure her feet. Outwardly, it looked like devotion, but underneath, this behavior was not loving, it was obsessive. Tina's half-sister, Lorraine Howard, would later testify that Richard was controlling, possessive, and simply odd. Richard criticized every friend Tina ever made. He would always find fault with each one until, little by little, her circle of friends grew smaller and smaller. He needed to know where she was at every moment of the day. Tina confided to her sister that she felt trapped. She told Lorraine she could never leave Richard because if she tried, he would follow her to the ends of the earth. Slowly, their lives shrank down to just the two of them. That was exactly the way Richard wanted it. In the early 1990s, the couple left England and settled in Fermoy, County Cork. Many years later, in 2016, they sold their Fermoy home and bought a house at number 3, Grattan Street in Yeovil, for €52,000. They moved into the new place in May of that year. This move distanced Tina even further from her family and from the Fermoy community where she had been well known and well loved. In Yeovil, almost nobody knew her, and neighbors rarely ever saw her without Richard. Financially, the pair struggled to make ends meet. They survived on social welfare benefits, with Richard officially listed as Tina's dependent. Their joint bank account was always overdrawn. Richard also carried with him a troubling criminal history. Between 1999 and 2004, he had 14 different convictions. These included charges of larceny, theft, social welfare fraud, and public order offenses. In December of 2002, he even served a 1-month sentence in Cork prison for social welfare fraud. On Sunday, the 19th of March, 2017, Tina and Richard went together to a car boot sale in Carrigtwohill, County Cork, which was about 35 kilometers from their home in Yeovil. Tina was in good spirits that day. She bought herself a lovely black jacket, a dress, and even some expensive perfume. She also chatted with a friend named John Kilgan, who joked that she might be seeing another man. Tina firmly replied, "I have one man only." She loved Richard deeply and said she would never touch another man. Those would be the last words anyone outside her home ever heard her speak. 4 days later, on Friday, the 24th of March, 2017, Richard drove 43 kilometers past his local station in Yeovil and instead went to Fermoy Garda Station to report Tina missing. Garda officer Connor Gately later recalled that Richard came across as matter of fact, not overly emotional. Richard told the Gardaí that he had waited those 4 days before reporting her missing because he thought Tina simply needed some time away to clear her head. He assumed she had gone to stay with her family in Fermoy. Richard claimed that on Monday morning, the 20th of March, he had made Tina breakfast at around 20 minutes past 9. He said it was tea, toast, and his special mixture of fruit and yogurt. According to him, Tina then asked him to drive to Aldi in Dungarvan, which was 30 kilometers away, to buy fish and food for their parrot named Valentine. Richard stated that he left their home sometime between 10 o'clock and 10:30 that morning, and that he returned around noon. When he got back, Tina was gone. He said she had taken 2 suitcases and 26,000 euros in cash that he claimed was kept in a box in the attic. When Richard later learned that Tina's family had not seen her, he expressed only mild concern. He insisted that Tina had left of her own choice. At first, Tina Satchwell's disappearance was treated almost like a routine check on someone who had simply walked away, not as a serious missing person case. It was not until the 11th of May, 2017, nearly 2 months after Tina had gone, that her husband Richard finally filed a formal missing person report. He met with Garda James Butler and gave him photographs of Tina so they could be used in appeals to the public. But Richard did not just sit back after filing the report. He threw himself into the spotlight with an enormous media campaign that lasted for years. Between June of 2017 and March of 2018, Richard gave at least 14 separate recorded interviews. He made himself constantly available to television, radio, and newspapers, always ready to talk about Tina. He appeared on programs like RTE's Crime Call, Primetime Investigates, TV3 and Virgin Media News, Ireland AM, The Ray D'Arcy Show, Cork's Red FM, and many other outlets. One of his most memorable appearances came on the 25th of July, 2017, on Crime Call. Richard sat in front of the camera, his eyes brimming with tears, and looked straight into the lens. His words sounded desperate, like a broken man. Tina, come home. Nobody is mad at you. My arms open. The pets are missing you. I just cannot go on not knowing. Please, you need to ring the Gardaí. Let people know you are safe. To the viewers at home, it looked like the heart-wrenching plea of a loving husband who wanted nothing more than his wife back. Richard told TV3 News on the 14th of July, 2017, that in all the 28 years of their marriage, he had never once lifted a hand to hurt Tina. Again and again, he told reporters that Tina would eventually show up, or at the very least get in touch. He even said on air that he would happily take a lie detector test to prove his honesty. But when the offer was made to him live on radio, he refused, saying he felt too tired and unwell to go through with it. Through all of these interviews, Richard pushed one steady story. He painted himself as the faithful husband of a troubled wife. He told anyone who would listen that after the death of Tina's brother Tom in 2012, she had grown unstable, angry, and violent. But every word of this tale was contradicted by Tina's family, her friends, and her medical records, all of which showed her as healthy, stable, and in no way the person Richard was trying to describe. His behavior after Tina went missing soon raised suspicion. On the 30th of March, just 10 days after she had vanished, Richard sent a message to Tina's cousin, Sarah Howard. In it, he asked, "Sarah, do you want our big chest freezer?" The very next day, he posted an advertisement online on the Done Deal website offering the freezer for free. His ad read, "Large chest freezer, free to take away. Working perfect, just needs a clean." By late April and into early May of 2017, Richard was selling Tina's personal belongings at the same car boot sales she had once loved attending. He sold her clothes, her doctor, Martins, boots, handbags, and other accessories. When friends asked him where Tina was, he gave a string of strange excuses. He said the house had a serious dry rot infection that made Tina very ill, and she had gone to England for treatment. He claimed she had lost 4 stone and was too sick to be seen. Other times he said she had a respiratory disease and could no longer come to the sales. All the while, her most recent purchases, a black jacket and a dress she had bought on her last Sunday, out hung unworn over a door in their living room. Tina never got to wear them. The first major Garda search of their home at number 3 Grattan Street took place on the 7th of June, 2017, not even 3 months after Tina's disappearance. By the end of May, Sergeant John Shy had already begun to believe something criminal might have happened. A search warrant was granted on the suspicion that Tina may have been harmed or incapacitated by someone. 10 officers spent around 12 hours carefully searching the property. Every corner was cataloged. The photographs taken during that search would later become deeply unsettling. They showed brand new unpainted stairs, fresh plasterboard along the stairs' side, and a newly built red brick wall beneath the stairwell. Forensic scientist Dr. Edward Connolly used luminol, a chemical that glows blue when it reacts with blood. He tested the living room, the stairs, and even Richard's car. Nothing showed up. No traces of blood, no visible signs of violence. The officers collected items like Richard's laptop and his mobile devices, but they did not break through the concrete floor under the stairs. They did not bring in a cadaver dog. They did not excavate. The house itself was in terrible condition, with dog feces spread across the floors and furniture, dishes left piled and unwashed, and a bird cage filthy from neglect. In the months and years that followed, Garda widened their search far beyond the house. On the 19th of August, 2017, the Garda Water Unit, the Irish Coast Guard, and Army personnel searched Yeovil Harbor during low tide. They also searched scrubland near Golf Links Road. In March of 2018, a major operation targeted Mitchell's Wood in Castle Martyr. Over 60 Gardaí, supported by Army engineers and cadaver dogs, spent nearly 2 full weeks combing through the 40-acre woodland. They even established a no-fly zone to keep the search private. But in the end, nothing was found. Altogether, the investigation followed more than 400 separate lines of inquiry. There were between 60 and 65 reported sightings of Tina, both in Ireland and abroad. Each sighting was checked, and every single one turned out false. Over 170 witness statements were taken. Investigators went through 100 hours of CCTV footage, and still, nothing led to Tina. Year after year, the investigation looked like it was stalling, drifting toward nowhere. Then, in August of 2021, everything began to change. Superintendent Anna Marie Toomey was appointed as a senior investigating officer. It was her very first time stepping into that role, and alongside Detective Garda Dave Kelleher, who was assigned as the incident room coordinator, she brought in a fresh team from the Cork North and West Division. Together they began a deep and careful review of the cold case. They went back over all 400 lines of inquiry that had been opened over the years. They looked again at every piece of CCTV footage. They reread and reanalyzed the more than 170 witness statements, and most importantly, they turned their attention to the digital devices that had been taken back in 2017 but had never truly been examined. The laptop that had been seized in 2017 had sat for years without a proper review. When Detective Garda Kelleher finally examined it toward the end of 2021, he uncovered something chilling. On Friday, the 24th of March, just 4 days after Tina had vanished, and on the very same day Richard reported her missing, someone had carried out an online search for the word quicklime at exactly 9 minutes past 9 in the evening. On that same laptop, a YouTube video titled Quicklime and Water Reaction had been played not once but twice. Quicklime, while a material used in building and construction, has a much darker reputation. It has long been known to speed up decomposition and suppress odors when bodies are hidden in mass graves. The second major breakthrough came in February of 2022. Mobile phone data, finally extracted and analyzed, painted a very different picture of Richard's movements. CCTV footage from the Yeovil post office placed him collecting social welfare at 10 minutes past 11 on the morning of the 20th of March. This proved he was in Yeovil, not in Dungarvan, as he had insisted. His phone's location data showed that immediately after leaving the post office, he returned home, where he stayed from around 11:10 until 12:50. That 100-minute window was critical. It completely contradicted the timeline Richard had given. According to the records, he had been at home during the very hours when he swore he had been shopping in Dungarvan. Investigators also found the very text message offering Tina's cousin Sarah Howard the chest freezer. Email and phone records helped build a clear timeline that tore apart nearly everything Richard had told the Gardaí. By February of 2022, Superintendent Toomey had reached a grim conclusion. Tina Satchwell, in her view, was not alive. She believed Tina had met her death by unlawful means. Yet there was still no body. That September, Superintendent Toomey asked Dr. Neil McCullough, a forensic archaeologist with expertise in finding and recovering hidden human remains, to take a close look at the case. In September of 2023, Dr. McCullough submitted her report. She noted that in cases of domestic homicide, offenders often create false stories and deliberately file misleading missing person reports. She explained that female victims of domestic homicide are usually found closer to home than male victims, often within just 1 kilometer of where they lived. The changes that had been made to the Satchwell house, clearly visible in the photographs from 2017, were glaring red flags. Her recommendation was clear. The house needed an invasive search using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. On the evening of the 10th of October, 2023, the Gardaí arrived at number 3 Grattan Street. With them were building contractors, excavation equipment, and a full forensic team. At exactly 5 o'clock in the evening, Richard Satchwell was arrested on suspicion of murder. At the same time, the search of the house began. Fern, a Springer Spaniel trained as a cadaver dog, was brought in with her handler. Almost immediately, Fern showed intense interest in the area under the stairs. Detective Garter Brian Berry, an expert in ballistics and forensic work, spotted something important. The red brick wall under the staircase looked uneven and amateurish, as if built by someone with no skill in masonry. Strong floodlights was set up. Investigators pulled back the old 1970s-style linoleum that covered the floor. Beneath it, they found exactly what they feared, a rectangular patch of concrete that was visibly newer and a different color from the surrounding floor. On the night of the 11th of October, at about 9 o'clock, the team began to break through the concrete with jackhammers. At a depth of around 64 centimeters, they struck black plastic sheeting. Work stopped immediately. The forensic archaeologist was called back in. The following morning, the careful excavation continued. A human hand was uncovered. Slowly, with precision and respect, the entire burial site was revealed. At 11:30 on the morning of the 12th of October, 2023, Assistant State Pathologist Dr. Margot Bolster arrived at the house. By noon, Richard Satchwell was arrested again, this time formally and publicly, at a bus stop in Yeovil. That evening, he was charged with murder. When the charge was read out to him, Richard gave a strange, cryptic answer: guilty or not guilty. The remains that had been recovered were taken to Cork University Hospital. On the 13th of October, 2023, dental records from Tina's dentist in Fermoy provided confirmation of what everyone already feared. The body that had been hidden under the stairs for 2,396 days was Tina Satchwell. Her Tweety Bird tattoo was still visible on her chest. In the left pocket of her dressing gown, Investigators found her wallet. Inside it were her public service card and the loyalty cards she had once carried to her favorite stores. After Tina's body was finally discovered, Richard's story changed again. He gave the Gardaí a completely new version of events. He said that on the day it happened, he had come in from the garden shed and found Tina at the bottom of the stairs, scraping plasterboard with a chisel. According to him, Tina suddenly turned on him, lunging with the chisel and trying to stab him in the head. He said he fell backwards with Tina landing on top of him. In that moment, he claimed he panicked and reached for the belt of her dressing gown. He said he pulled it tight around her neck, holding on until she grew heavier. Within seconds, she went limp and died right there in his arms. Richard told investigators that he sat holding her body for 20 to 30 minutes, while their two dogs, Ruby and Heidi, licked at her as if they were confused. He said that at first, he laid her body on the couch and left her there for a day or two. But when the dogs would not stop going to her, he moved her into the chest freezer that was kept in their garden shed around the 22nd or 23rd of March. The freezer was unplugged and, according to him, being used only for storage, not for keeping things cold. He said that after this, he began digging a grave under the stairs in their sitting room. He described working like a machine, on autopilot, not even thinking, just digging from daylight until darkness. By the end, he said, all of his knuckles were bleeding from the effort. The grave itself was unusually deep for a secret burial. It measured between 64 and 84 centimeters deep, over 2.5 feet, and had been cut into sandy soil. On Mother's Day, Sunday the 26th of March, 2017, Richard said he took Tina's body out of the freezer and prepared to bury her. He wrapped her in black plastic sheeting that they had used before as ground cover for car boot sales. Her body was placed face down, still dressed in her pajamas and her dressing gown. The belt of the gown was tied around her body in a strange and unnatural way. It was looped over the left side of her neck, under her right shoulder and arm, across beneath her body, and then knotted in the front over her chest. The belt had not been threaded through the dressing gown's loops, as it normally would be. Richard claimed that he wanted to give her dignity in burial. He said he had gone out to buy roses to put with her, but because it was Mother's Day, the shops only had tulips left. He threw the tulips into the grave, though no flowers were ever found later. He said he placed Tina's wedding ring into the pocket of her robe, telling Gardaí that it was so she would know the hand that killed her was also the hand that loved her. The ring was never found. He filled in the grave with soil and then poured about 1 meter of concrete over 3 feet over the top. Afterwards, he built a red brick wall along the side of the stairs and put up fresh plasterboard to hide the work he had done. Richard Satchwell's trial opened in late April of 2025 at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. The trial lasted for 23 days. More than 50 witnesses took the stand. Richard pleaded not guilty to murder. Lead prosecutor Geraldine Small described him as an arch manipulator, a man who was shamelessly brazen to the very end. The evidence against him was damning. Dr. Margaret Bolster testified that Tina's skeleton showed no fractures anywhere, undermining his story about a violent struggle. The online search for quicklime made 4 days after Tina vanished suggested consciousness of guilt. The CCTV footage and phone location data proved Richard had lied again and again about his movements. Perhaps the most powerful moments came when the jury was shown clips of Richard himself, 14 separate media appearances, where he cried on camera, pleaded for Tina to come home, and insisted she was still alive somewhere. His defense barrister, Brendan Green, argued that there had been no intent to kill. Richard himself chose not to testify. On Tuesday, the 27th of May, 2025, the jury began their deliberations in the afternoon. They spent a total of 9 hours and 28 minutes reviewing the evidence. 3 days later, At about 25 minutes past 12 on Friday, they returned to the courtroom. Their verdict was unanimous. Richard Satchwell was guilty of murder. He showed no emotion as the words were read. Behind him, Tina's family wept. Mr. Justice Paul McDermott then imposed a mandatory sentence for murder life imprisonment. Outside the court, Sarah Howard spoke for the family. She said Tina was a kind, loving, and gentle soul who loved her animals like they loved her. And that is the way we want her remembered. Today, as a family, we finally have justice for Tina. Back in October of 2023, when Tina's remains were first recovered, more than 200 people had gathered for a vigil in Yofel. Many brought their dogs in tribute to Tina's love for animals. Later, her ashes were divided. Half were laid to rest with her brother Tom. Half were buried with her grandmother, Florence, the woman who had raised her. The truth of what happened to Tina only came out because of persistence. When Superintendent Anne Marie Toomey took charge in August of 2021, she refused to let the trail go cold. She went back through every line of inquiry, every photograph, every scrap of evidence. Her patient, careful work finally brought Tina home. Tina Satchwell is now at peace, resting beside her brother Tom and her grandmother Florence. She is remembered for who she truly was, gentle, kind, and full of life, with an infectious smile and a deep love for animals and fashion. She deserves so much more than the life Richard gave her, and she certainly deserved more than the death and the grave beneath the stairs where he put her. What she deserves most of all is to be remembered, and now, thanks to the courage of her family, she always will be.